Thank you so much, Brise. I'm also being joined by Bill Whitney, co-founder of the Prairie Plains Resource Institute, and Graham Christensen of GC Resolve. And before we get started with questions, Bill and Graham, I'll let you to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your organizations.
You want to go first, Graham?
Bill, out of respect to you, I think you should go first.
Okay. My name is Bill Whitney. I'm the recently retired director and founder, along with my wife Jan, who's in the other room, of Prairie Plains Resource Institutes, beginning in 1980. And I appreciate, as Dave talked about the early days, and Christian showed us the growth and the new equipment in the processing facility, what it was like to start from scratch. So good job, Dave. I'm going to share a screen with a few slides. I want to give some context for host disabled. I want to share some context for the work we do with the landscape and agriculture. I'm not primarily an organic grower or farmer, but we've worked with grasslands, and there's relevance across the landscape for grasslands. Okay, here we go. Make this as quick as I can. Basically what we need desperately is a new societal vision of the landscape, inclusive of people and nature, and is about revitalizing agriculture and communities. Along with that, a new educational process to learn about the land, science, nature, history, culture, and agriculture, and the advancement of arts and skills to make people creative stewards. And we need constant discussion about the common good and actions according to that. We have to begin to change the way we live, I guess. Without these things, agriculture, nature, and society are going to suffer. And as we move towards climate change and stresses and energy scarcity, this is imperative. I wanted to give you some background geographically. Let me turn it on the slideshow here. Geographically, this is a GIS map of this area. Grain Place is right here where my cursor is. Platte River, but this is really an instrumental map showing the hydraulic system of this region. Platte River, Loop River, all the little streams and tributaries that run into either the Big Blue River down here and into Kansas, or the Platte system up above the river here. This is very important to keep a landscape view of our waters and how we use the land across that landscape. We still have grasslands up along the loop. We have some along the Platte. We have scattered grasslands and farm country, but it's real important to have the context to see this as the communities in this big sea of rolling to fairly flat terrain where our productive agriculture is. So one of the things that we came up with in Prairie Plains was the idea called ribbons of prairie. It's just to visualize prairie along where water flows. We want to maintain and restore native plant biodiversity, preserve local and regional flora and fauna, and protect existing working grasslands, which many of them are primarily native and more as you go west, and to create an innovative land stewardship culture. We want to restore crop watersheds from top to bottom. This is a big task. This is a visionary task. But we need to change. If we want water quality, we need to change how water flows on the land and we need to hold on to the water longer. So in Nebraska, for example, it flows down into the Ogallala aquifer, and we want to hold the soil on better, and that has to do with how we crop and the buffers and so forth that we have between that soil and the farmland, and things preventing it from going down into the rivers. We want to plant prairie where water flows, field waterways, prairie strips, road ditches. You go back to that map I showed you, every square mile in that grid of survey grid is a drainage way. It's part of the hydraulic system. Then it flows into creeks and larger rivers. We need to exploit the native grasslands' functional qualities to make water cleaner, hold soil, provide for insect diversity, predators, and pollinators, and develop crop agriculture in the context of this ecological and hydrological matrix. And in the process, we add great native grazing land and biodiversity and productivity, and we improve existing native prairie through management. And finally, connect people. I noticed my numbering is off. Connect people, revitalize small town farm culture and local economies through work of growing and selling food, through volunteer and professional restoration and stewardship and education, and connecting people, communities, so forth, to rural places. We have 3 prototypes we've worked on since 1980. Lincoln Creek Prairie and Trail in Aurora, Platte River Bluff Prairies in northern Campbellton along the river, and Haynes Branch and Spring Creek Prairie Corridor. These are things that are happening now. Lincoln Creek is tiny. It's where we began. It's where the ideas gestated back in 1980. Grew into these larger concepts, but involved working in groups and developing leaders and more. We have to see visions in both cultural and natural terms. Henceforth, we need more natural resource education. The Platte River Bluffs mixed grass prairie of Sherman land, showing our tree clearing. There's Jeff Gustafson's favorite vehicle right down there, a skid steer. Grazing and forb enrichment through prescribed burning to increase insect and plant diversity and grass quality for grazing. Thanks to Sarah Bailey, here's a nice photo of Grilloff Prairie, a mile from the Sherman Ranch. And just a project we've had a part of a large group of people volunteering and partnering in a long greenway out of Lincoln, Nebraska. More in an urbanizing context than an agricultural one, but similar, gives some ideas of how people can work together to do this. Volunteers, researchers at Spring Creek. We want to do some of this planning and thinking and talking and doing at the Prairie Plains Charles L. Whitney Education Center, almost completed, about 5 miles from the grain place. None of this is easy. It has to start small, and we have to carry out the vision in small bites, but we have to keep thinking about this for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Graham?
Greetings, friends. My name is Graham Christensen. I am part of a family farming operation from northeast Nebraska, about 1 hour north of Omaha, Nebraska. My brother and I, just this last year, really kind of officially got the reins in the transition of the farm. We're 5th generation, so this is a long tradition that stems back to 1867 for us. And our farm is definitely in the phase of moving away from what people would call a conventional operation into a more regenerative path. And then we have goals to marry regenerative and organic a few years down the road here. So it's an exciting time for us. I'm also the founder and president of GC Resolve, which is a consulting and communications group. I work primarily on environmental issues with an amazing team. And a lot of that's focused around the food production system and regenerative ag. We kind of have a two-step process. Number one, expose the bad things that are going on out there with agriculture, with facts, data, science, so that more and more people can start to actually see what is happening in true colors, and then offer that solution, that regenerative pathway. And so we get into all kinds of really interesting projects. One of our favorite projects is that we've been involved with is the establishment and creation of Regenerate Nebraska, which is a large network. There's just under 90 network partners across the state. Bill Whitney and Prairie Plains Institute are one of the partners, and of course, so is Grain Place Foods. And we're joined by a lot of different and diverse groups that come from the inner city of Omaha to tribal lands, and of course, as well as from the rural parts of the state of Nebraska. We have put together a statement that is talking about redirecting the entire state into a better pathway for agriculture. And so we're hard at work with that. One of the projects, and the project that I wanted to introduce you to today that we're excited about, is called PrEP Rural. And what that stands for, the PrEP is an acronym for Pandemic Research for the People. We, as in GC Resolve, was approached by a team of researchers that have done a whole bunch of various great reporting and research projects, but most recently has been assembling a project around the pandemic, the threats it brings to rural areas. But there's also a PrEP neighborhoods for inner city and urban areas, and a PrEP ecology, which is really focused on ecological transformation. And so what we're seeing already is through these three groups, we're having intersectional conversations that are they're connecting the dots and bringing us together a lot of times around the food production system. So this is brand new. So you're going to get a quick sneak preview of what is starting to take place. The first topic that we've put together with this large network from all across the country is called Fixing COVID-19 Related Disparities and the National Security Threat of a Fragile Food System. And so there are about 80 entities that form this group. It is extremely diverse. It does create an intersectional conversation, which we felt at this time is more important than ever to be able to unify this. And if you take a peek in Nebraska, which this first document that has not been released will highlight, you can definitely see some of the disparities that are taking place in the food system more clearly. COVID has brought this up to the forefront and made it easier for more and more people to see what's going on. But of course, in our meat packing plants and these large centralized systems, there's a real travesty taking place. And we need to get to the bottom of why this is taking place right now. More people in the public need to be aware that there are a lot of casualties taking place within these systems. And furthermore, that a lot of the companies that run these systems have been skimping on human rights issues. People in low wages, for example, asked to purchase their own masks, not being able to get a pay raise in a lot of cases, while we watch some of these larger entities donate to Chamber of Commerce's in towns to try to refocus the positive attention with the community, when yet these people fall further and further behind. The lack of ability to be able to even deal with the COVID or implement safety measures such as social distancing. These are just a few examples of some of the things that we're seeing. So what did we want to do when we're starting to see all this? It felt like it was very important to take a step back and look at a case study. And Nebraska has a really interesting is a really interesting place to take a look at this case study. And I think a lot of the Plains states and the Midwestern region can really relate to what's happened here. But to a certain extent, probably most states across the country. In Nebraska, we used to have a ban on corporate farming. it left us a much more competitive atmosphere that was much more inclusive for a lot of independent farming operations. It also helped keep away this extreme form of vertical integration in these mega businesses. Now you see Costco and Walmart, for example, retail entities that are now owning the processing sector, moving closer themselves towards monopolization or having control of every piece of the food sector, whether it's farming, distribution, meat packing, et cetera. With the removal by the courts of that system about 12 years ago, that piece that was implemented in our Constitution by the majority of voters in Nebraska in 1982, we've seen a very aggressive push of these systems into our area, much like what has happened in Iowa. Of course, this has been accompanied by other things, the weakening of our local control systems in favor of putting the government, the state government, in positions to make more decisions that local county boards typically would be making. By relinquishing protections for independent farmers, so it makes them tougher to compete. And I'm talking about the removal of bans that did not allow meat packers to own pigs and poultry. Now, with them being able to own pigs and poultry legally in our state and other states, once again, it puts the farmer, the independent farmer, at an extreme disadvantage. We've had the push for right to farm to try to take away our constitutional rights as communities to deal with liabilities that come from bigger, extremely vertically integrated systems as well. And then, of course, with federal legislation in the form of NAFTA, the neglect of antitrust enforcement, and the debasement of country of origin labeling have all further put independent farmers on the chopping block. And of course, the result now, further accelerated by this administration, is that many farmers are nearing bankruptcy and is starting to take a picture that reminds me a lot of my early childhood growing up in the 1980s during the farm crisis and the American ag movement. But we have the solution, and I think that is the important thing. We know economically sound and environmentally friendly opportunities that exist. And so the focus has become regenerative agriculture production and regional food security. The part that we didn't talk about that's really important to understand with the COVID cases that have been impacting the workers in the meatpacking plants is that we've started to hear rumors from the big companies that the food supply could come up short. And as we've started to hear those comments coming into big newspapers, the small farmers in our few, really only a few anymore, scattered independent butchering and processing operations are now backed up until 2021, late 2021, and in some cases 2022. So if you were to see the COVID situation continue to decrease or increase the spread and transmission of this virus into the fall and into the winter, then I fear that there could be really food security threats, which is a national security implication or threat that we should be addressing right now in order to get ahead of this. And so we identified 6 actions on this first conversation that we're having that can improve the national security of our country by focusing on the food system. And the 6 actions, of course, number 1 has to be increasing worker protections, pay, and safety standards. The workers in the meatpacking plants are not being protected adequately. Once again, a human rights issue that we must address. And so even though these meatpacking plants are very centralized, and this doesn't get to the root of the problem, number 1, we have to take care of the people that are also working with us in this industry and make sure that they're protected. The second thing starts to get to more of the structural changes of agriculture, because this situation will only be more prevalent in future years unless we actually look at policy issues that deal with the systemic issues that go way, way back in this form of food production. And so, as we mentioned earlier, antitrust legislation and enforcement, it has to be updated, and it actually has to be enforced. It is vital right now in the uncompetitive food production system that we live in, that we open up more opportunities for more independent operations. The third thing is state inspection of meat processing. There's a lot of conversation going on around this, but what we found out in Nebraska, it's very hard to get a USDA certified butchering shop opened in town. It's very tough to get the feds out to be able to help get these things started up, but also just to have proper inspection, to help us meet proper inspection protocols. States have to be once again allowed to have state inspection of meat processing, following some of the USDA guidelines, but we just have to be allowed to have that. That accompanied with the cooperative interstate shipment program can really open up both local and regional marketplaces so that we no longer have those food security threats, and that more of these young, diverse, regenerative farmers have additional localized market opportunities. State inspection is vital. Number 4, farm subsidy reform. I don't think I have to spend a lot of time on this one, but we will do some deeper dives into this up and coming, I am sure. The current system favors the big guys and is allowing these things to continue to happen, where really what we need to do is start investing in the next generation of farmers. And if we do not do that, all of this land that is held by the older generations, or primarily the baby boomer generation, has risk of transitioning into corporate hands. And if we are really trying to regenerate the soil and lower greenhouse gas emissions, that is a recipe for disaster. We need young, innovative, creative, and diverse people back on the land. There has to be a pathway to ownership. That is just one little piece of subsidy reform that I am talking about. Number 5, resuscitate or rejuvenate those state level corporate farming bans. We need to get active and protect ourselves, because in Nebraska, we're getting drilled by that right now. And it is a very scary time for the future of our communities as we try to deal with this without having a lot of local control abilities that we used to have more of. And number 6, a key security piece in the Farm Bill is starting to re-implement strategic grain reserves. We need grain reserves to make sure that we have adequate supplies of grains should the worst come to worst, and it just creates another safety net for farmers. These are the 6 interventions that this group of 80 from across the country focused to on this first discussion. The next discussions will be on historical discrimination within the USDA and plantation economics, and the third one will be on nutrition. This is your sneak peek of Prep Rural, and do stay tuned, because the stuff should start traveling around the country here pretty soon, next week even.
Great. Thank you, Graham. That's a lot of information from you both for us to think about. We have one of our board members joining us, Kathleen Dillett, and I believe she has a question for Brise.
Thank you so much, Brise, for talking today. I really enjoyed your talk, learned a lot. And we're really grateful to OFRF for not only their support of organic research, but for all their efforts to get USDA in Washington, D.C. to support more organic farming research. OFRF was instrumental in that. I was happy to hear about the soil quality guidebooks. I'm hoping some of our research from Iowa State University that shows higher soil quality in organic fields, higher carbon sequestration. I hope some of that research does show up in those books. I haven't had a chance to read them yet. But one thing I wanted to ask you, Brise, our challenge here is getting more conventional farmers to recognize the benefits of organic farming. And I noticed you said that you had 50,000 views of the guidebooks. I'm wondering if you are able to separate organic people versus conventional that are looking at those guidebooks, or what's your feeling about conventional farmers taking a look at some of the research coming out of OFRF? Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that question. In terms of the downloads and what we're getting from the just huge numbers of people who are viewing and accessing, we have to assume by the numbers, although we can't track, that they are not just organic farmers using them. I believe that they are farmers of all types, but also ag professionals, researchers, extension agents, and others. And I think that's a really good sign. So we find that exciting, just the diversity of folks using it. Definitely when we've conducted webinars on those, in that case, we do ask people if they're a farmer, if they're organic, and it's very interesting, the mix of folks attending those. And it probably is reflective of who's downloading it. So definitely, like I said, not just farmers, but of the farmers, they're not all organic. And I think we've seen that in some of the content. We often will, in a normal year when we're not in a pandemic, spend a fair amount of our time going to grower conferences around the country to bring our resources, to share the research findings, and also just to make folks available, aware of us as a resource. And I know last year, one of our staff was at a conference that I was not at myself, and he was doing a presentation on our soil health for risk management and utilizing best soil health practices to manage on-farm risk, and came back and was, I think feeling bad, like he was maybe gonna, get in trouble or something. He's like, so there was no organic farmers in my session. I was like, well, were there farmers there? And he's like, well, yeah, there was a lot of farmers there, but none of them were organic. And I was like, that is success. That to me was the ultimate sign that you're doing something right. So I think that's great. And I would just say on that, one last thing is that because we had, for the first time ever, a federal grant to conduct our national survey. This is our 7th survey we've done of nationally of farmers across the country to understand their challenges. And for the most part, we've done those on shoestring budgets. We've gotten a lot of great input from farmers in every region. But this time, because we had a little bit more resources to put together the survey, we are actually working with Washington State University in the survey design. But what we were able to do is create almost identical, but actually a separate survey tool that is inviting just those growers who are saying they're transitional, which is kind of broad. We don't have a great way to track those, but we know those are folks who are probably not currently certified organic. And we have gotten fairly good response to that too. It is still open. So if there are folks here listening today who are either organic or transitioning or thinking of organic and want to share their feedback, those survey tools are still open. But we are hoping that that will be another way to better understand what some of those obstacles are to transitioning to organic production.
Thanks, Brise. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
So we have a question from one of our attendees for Brise. What do you think of research by Stephanie Senegal on glyphosate and COVID, etc.?
I'm so sorry to say I'm actually not familiar with that research, but I will take that question back to our research team and see if they have input, and if there's a way we can share feedback from our research staff later, I will happily do that.
Okay. I know we have a question for Graham about what can we as consumers do about this looming food crisis?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The consumers have to be on equal footing as the farmer, and so unification there is also a key. Once that means reestablishing relationships with the farmer, even if it's, flashing a barcode or putting in a website to be able to see where the farmer is and where their principles are and how they produce their crop is going to be essential for the consumers to take back control of their food supply that has been hijacked. And so that reestablishment is very important. In Nebraska, that is one of the primary purposes of regeneratenebraska.com. Yes, it's a vision on the future of agriculture, but it's one that's led by the consumer, no matter where that consumer may be within Nebraska's, the state of Nebraska's boundaries. And so support those ethical businesses. And then in other communities that have been even left further behind on accessibility issues, there is a lot of amazing conversation happening around food sovereignty. How are we able to produce the food right here ourselves as much as humanly possible? And then how do we connect with the farmers right around this area so that we no longer are a food insecure community? One example of a really cool project that we're starting to look at just to paint that picture, would be with the Canhowal tribe in South Omaha. It's a refugee tribe from Guatemala that had to flee and ended up on the south side of Omaha. And that project is a 3-part project. The first 2 steps are really underway this year. One of them is helping give them the tools and resources so that they can plant the kind of crops that they want in partnership with a couple of really great Regenerate Nebraska partners as well. One of them being Sacred Seed, another one being Omaha Permaculture, and No More Empty Pots has also come into play. So you're seeing collaboration to help lift some other communities off the ground. They are also the second part of this, outside of growing their own food, once again, is connecting with Lone Tree Foods or some of our distribution groups of farmers to access more foods. And then we're looking at working with the Nebraska Land Trust down the road to be able to develop a place where they can relocate, feel safe about it, and produce larger amounts of food, both for their community and for a prosperous future.
Okay. And Brise, I might ask you to comment on that as well, because I know OFRF has information for consumers as well. And so what kind of info do you have for them? And obviously their website, they can get that info, but then what would you tell a consumer who's concerned about potential food shortage, et cetera?
Yeah, you know, it's we've been definitely evolving as an organization. I think historically, really, our audience of our content has been farmers, researchers, and policymakers. And a couple of years ago, we realized that if you're just kind of in a Google search bar and type in organic farming, that our website was usually one of the top places people would come to. And so we sort of saw that as a bit of a responsibility that, you know, people who are looking for information are landing on our website. So we've been building out more content on why organic and really trying to stick to what we see as our strength of just science-based information on the farming practices, and really helping understand just the environmental stewardship and the care and the love that's going into growing food organically. So most of our information is not so much on access, but how to understand what purchasing organic means. And then where we've been really expanding our time in maybe the last 3 to 6 months is on social media. And I think that, as I mentioned in my talk, that people may be at home, they're sheltering in place, but they are looking for information, and that includes on food and what they're buying and trying to learn what it means. So we don't have a lot of great information on our website on where to buy the food, but on what it means. And the social media campaign we've built, we're calling it A Path to Resilience. And it's mostly around how to better understand the climate mitigation and adaptation potential of organic systems, but trying to make that less geeky, less sciencey, less out in the weeds. And it's just been really, really fascinating to watch and engage with what people are asking about, where they're looking for information, and, you know, just how they're engaging with that online content. But we've had I think a 500% increase over the last 3 months in our social media followers, and, you know, I don't know what the terminology is, but their views where they're, you know, actually responding and engaging with that content. So, you know, we're gonna keep putting that out, building that ability for consumers to engage. And I think it's so important for the farmers too, to build just better awareness of what organic is. Because I think that, you know, we have a lot of people who choose organic because they have a perception that it's healthier for them and their families to eat it. But I don't think always connect it to the broader resiliency issues of, you know, how caring for the land is part of food security, caring for our water and our soil and our topsoil and, you know, the ecosystem diversity. But the awareness of the more multifaceted benefits of organic is definitely growing. And I think that's just super exciting to see.
Right. So I know another sort of new program for you, you had mentioned that federal policy program, and you've hired a new staff person. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. It's definitely the passion area for me and the work we do. You know, we can make research grants all day long, but our resources are finite. They're not huge. But the opportunity is to really keep pushing for bigger investments in organic at a federal level. And it's an area where we've had, I think, tremendous successes over the years. We do mostly federal level policy, so engaging with Farm Bill, congressional appropriations to USDA programs, and really trying to make programs, whether research, extension, crop insurance, as I mentioned, conservation programs, more accessible to organic producers. Over the last year, we've definitely been bringing, I would say, new framing to that work. We're really talking about organic is a tool to addressing climate change and building more resiliency in our food systems. And I think that it's a good time to do it. Policymakers, despite all the other chaos that's happening in DC, climate change is getting a lot of attention, from, you know, the efforts of a Green New Deal to Congresswoman Pingree recently introduced her ag resilience bill, which really is one of the first pieces that's directly just on the role of agriculture in mitigating climate change. So we did hire a policy staff person. We usually have full-time staffing in DC, but this is the first time we hired someone who's just there as a climate policy associate. It's a split position that we've partnered with one of our longtime allies, the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, to jointly hire this young woman who's just been really a rock star. She started during the pandemic, so while we're all remote, but has just jumped in really, really gracefully. And what we're doing is we're diving into the science, right? Taking all of that we've learned about the best organic practices, particularly around soil health, and how do we leverage those into actual policy initiatives. So we're coming out with a 5-part kind of policy roadmap for key policy levers that can further support, incentivize, and reward organic growers who are using those best organic practices, which we'll be sharing very soon. So stay tuned. But I think one thing I would leave with those of you who are attending today is, as we roll out this policy framework that will be leading into both regulatory recommendations and what we want to bring to the administration, both the current and potentially a new administration next year, is sort of that first 100 days of what can happen at a regulatory level within USDA programs, and then what are those legislative pieces that really we need to start building marker bills that can inform the next farm bill. And why I mention it today is that we're going to be looking for more people to engage on this, because how you make change in Washington, DC is having a lot of voices speaking out for the importance of it. So the more we have farmers, ag industry, partners, researchers engaging and saying, yes, this is important. We know these practices have potential. Here's how we think we can actually get them off the ground, the better chance we have of successfully making those changes in the next farm bill. So we will be back in touch and asking people to weigh in, join, lend their voices, sign on, be willing to, make themselves heard. And in a strange way, we have a silver lining here in terms of policy work, and that we don't always have the time or money to show up in Washington, DC and knock on the doors of policymakers. But right now they're taking their meetings virtually. So even those of us who don't usually have the time and travel budget to go to DC and do that type of work can actually engage and reach out a little bit more easily to their congressional representatives, senators, et cetera, and say, hey, this is important to me too. So I will just, ask those of you who care about this to be thinking about that. And as you see and hear of opportunities, whether organized by us or other partners in this work, that it's really, really important.
Okay, that sounds exciting. I know we're getting close to time, but we do have a question for Dad from one of our attendees, asking you about why you became involved in the Regenerative Organic Certification Program. And you might just briefly talk about what that is for the folks who may be watching that aren't producers, for our food eaters that may not know, and then why you got involved in that.
The Regenerative Organic Certification Program was basically spearheaded by Rodale Research Institute, Patagonia, and Dr. Bronner's in putting that framework together, networking with a lot of farmers and other people in that supply chain, putting real emphasis on soil health, social justice, and animal welfare, in addition to what is the National Organic Program requirements. So it asks a lot of it. One of the reasons we became involved in it with the establishment of the foundation and stuff here, I felt it was important that we start really documenting some of the things that we were seeing with soil and soil health. And there's a pretty good framework in there for evaluating soil health. So that was an attractive piece to me. But the other part of it was, I think it's always good to put a target out there to help you see what you can do to be better than you were last year and be better next year than you were this year. And so that was an important piece of that for me. And also that it was really consistent with the vision that Dad and I had back 40 years ago.
Great. So we are at time. I want to thank everybody for being with us. I particularly want to thank Brise and Bill and Graham, and you have exciting work going on in all three of your organizations. So we look forward to seeing what comes out of all of that. I want to thank our sponsors, all the people behind the scenes who helped make this technology machine work, right? This was a new sort of an experiment for us. Thank you for all of those who've joined us and for caring about organic food and regenerative agriculture. You can find more information about all the organizations on their website, so make sure you Google them and look them up. You can find more information about the foundation at grandplacefoundation.org. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Again, thank you for being here. If you have more questions, you can let us know, and we can answer those offline, and particularly through our Facebook page on the comment section. And again, thank you for caring about food and recognizing that how your food is produced does matter. So thank you.
Thank you. Fun to join you all today.
Yes, great job, everybody. Thanks.
Glad you